The envelope made a soft, deliberate sound as it slid across the polished dining table, quiet, controlled, practiced. The kind of move you don't make unless you're used to ending conversations with money. Richard Hale, my father-in-law, kept his smile small and confident, like he was doing me a favor. Across from him, his wife Diane stared at her plate as if she'd already decided how this story would be told later. We tried to handle it privately. We offered him something generous. He wouldn't cooperate. My wife Claire sat beside me with her shoulders tight, fingers locked around her wine glass. She'd barely touched it all night. She didn't need to say anything for me to read her, "Please don't let this turn ugly." Richard tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. "Go on," he said, voice smooth. "Open it." I didn't reach for it yet. I just looked at him, at the suit he wore in his own house, at the ring that flashed every time he moved his hand, at the way he carried himself like the room belonged to him, even when he invited people into it. He thought he was buying me out, not of a business deal, not of some contract, out of my marriage. Claire's mother cleared her throat. "Nathan," she began, too sweet, too careful. "We've been thinking about what's best for Claire. Long term. Long term. Code for your temporary." Richard leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said. "You're a smart guy, you understand reality." Reality, according to him, was a number with commas. I finally pulled the envelope toward me and opened it. A check, 500,000. It sat there on thick paper like an insult dressed up as generosity. Claire inhaled sharply. "What is that?" Richard didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on me. "It's a clean solution," he said. "Sign the paperwork. Take the money. Walk away. No drama, no public mess." He said it like I'd been hired and the job was ending. My wife's hand slid under the table and found mine, tight, trembling. And that was the part that almost broke my composure. Not the check, not the audacity, the fact that Claire didn't know. She didn't know that the man offering me $500,000 was only sitting in this mansion because, 8 years ago, someone anonymous started pouring lifeline capital into his dying company. She didn't know that I was that anonymous investor. She didn't know that I owned enough of Richard Hale's business to remove him from his own boardroom with a single vote. And Richard, smiling like a king, convinced he was ending my life with a pen, had no idea that he'd just slid his own mistake across the table. To understand why I let it get this far, you need to know what my life looked like before that envelope hit the table. My name is Nathan Cross, and this is the story of how I sat at my father-in-law's table while he tried to pay me to disappear, without realizing he'd been answering to me for years. On paper, I'm exactly what the Hales believed I was, a mid-level data analyst for a finance and compliance firm downtown. I clock in, I build reports, I sit in meetings where people argue about numbers they barely understand, and I drive home in a car that's old enough to be overlooked in any parking lot. It's a perfectly believable life, because it's not even fake. It's just incomplete. What no one in my day-to-day world knows is that I don't work because I need the salary. I work because I like the discipline of it. I like staying sharp. I like being around reality. 8 years ago, when I was 24, my grandfather died and left me a modest inheritance by wealthy people's standards. Enough that if I was careful, I'd never have to worry again. Most people would have upgraded their life overnight. New apartment, new car, flashy vacations. Instead, I did what my grandfather always taught me to do when everyone else was celebrating. I looked for what they were ignoring. Richard Hale's real estate company was in trouble back then, the kind of trouble you don't admit at parties. Good assets, bad structure. Over-leveraged projects, investors spooked, lenders tightening their grip. I ran the numbers out of curiosity at first, then with focus. It was undervalued, mismanaged, and salvageable, so I started buying in, quietly, through a holding company with a name that meant nothing. NC Holdings. No interviews, no public profile. Layers of paperwork designed for one purpose: anonymity. It wasn't about controlling Richard, it wasn't personal. Not then. Then I met Claire. She wasn't like the world she came from. She worked for a nonprofit that partnered with public schools, the kind of job people like Richard call cute, when they don't know how to respect it. She didn't flaunt anything. She didn't treat service staff like furniture. She was sharp, funny, stubborn in the best way. On our third date, she warned me, eyes steady, voice almost embarrassed. "My family is intense. About money, status, appearances. If you can't handle that, you should walk away now. I should have listened to the weight behind that sentence, but I loved her, and I wanted something simple to be chosen for who I was, not for what I owned. That's why I kept the mask on. At first, I thought it would protect me. Then I realized it was protecting Claire, too, because the moment her father learned the truth, his respect wouldn't be love, it would be calculation. I learned that the first time Richard shook my hand and asked what I did, and when I told him, his smile didn't reach his eyes. Oh, he said, like he'd just found the price tag. And once her family decided I didn't belong, they never stopped testing it. It started the way these things always start, small enough that if you called it out, you'd look sensitive, but sharp enough to leave a mark. At our first holiday dinner after the wedding, Diane introduced me to one of her friends as Ethan, not Nathan. Ethan. When I corrected her, she laughed lightly, like names were such a silly detail to get right. "Oh, you know me," she said, patting my arm. "I'm terrible with names." She wasn't terrible with names. She was perfect with the names that mattered to her. Richard's cuts were different. He didn't do passive. He did polished condescension, smiling while he made sure you understood your place. So, he'd say, leaning back with a drink in his hand, "How's the little spreadsheet job treating you?" I wasn't building spreadsheets. I was building models that predicted risk exposure and fraud patterns for corporate clients. But I learned quickly that accuracy wasn't the point. The point was to make my work sound smaller than his world. And then there was Trevor Whitman, the ex-boyfriend who never really left the room. Diane would bring him up like a harmless memory. "Trevor just closed another fund," she'd say, slicing into her steak. "He's doing so well. Such a driven young man." Richard would nod, like he was proud of someone else's son. "That boy understands capital. He understands leverage." Not everyone does. They never said, "Why didn't you marry him instead?" They didn't have to. Claire always felt it. I could see it in the way her jaw would tighten and her eyes would drop for a second before she forced a smile. Under the table, her hand would find mine, an apology without words. Sometimes she'd try to buffer me directly. "Dad, Nathan works in finance," she'd say, a little edge in her voice. Richard would raise his eyebrows.
"Oh, finance."
"Well, good for you." As if I'd just told him I'd learned to tie my shoes. Their wealth wasn't loud in the way people imagine. It was quiet and constant. Good lighting, immaculate floors, art that looked expensive because it was, and a house that always smelled like money and lemon polish. The kind of home where nothing ever looked lived in, because lived in was another word for messy, and messy was another word for lower. The worst part wasn't even the comments. It was how normal it was to them. How effortless. They treated status like gravity, something you didn't question, you just accepted. Claire and I got through it the way we always did. We drove home in silence for a few minutes. Then she'd exhale and say, "I'm sorry." And I'd tell her the truth. "It's not your fault." But the truth underneath that truth was this: I was watching. I was learning. I was taking notes on who they were when they believed I had no power. The invitation that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning. Claire was standing in our kitchen in her work clothes, hair still damp from the shower, staring at her phone like it had insulted her. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. "A text from Diane. Dinner this Friday. Just the four of us. It's important." Claire swallowed. "When my mom says important like that," she said quietly, "it's never good." When my wife said the words, "just the four of us," I knew it wasn't a dinner. It was a hearing. Claire set her phone down like it might burn her. "They want us there," she said, but it didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like a summons. I tried to keep my tone light. "Maybe they're finally going to apologize." She gave me a look that told me she'd lived in their world too long to believe in miracles. "No," she said. "When my parents get formal like that, when it's just the four of us, it means they're deciding something. Like it's a board meeting." That word landed heavy between us. Claire's whole body carried tension in a way it never did when we talked about anything else. At work, she could handle crisis calls from schools, budget fights, angry parents. But her family turned her back into a kid who'd learned early that love could come with conditions. "We don't have to go," she said quickly, like she'd been rehearsing the idea. We can make an excuse. Say you're working late. Say I have an event. Anything. I watched her, really watched her. How her shoulders were drawn up, how her voice was controlled but thin. She wasn't trying to avoid conflict for herself. She was trying to protect me from being cut again. Part of me wanted to agree, to spare her the stress, to spare us another drive home where she apologized for people who didn't deserve her loyalty. But another part of me, the part that had sat quietly through every spreadsheet job, joke, and every Trevor comparison, was done pretending this didn't matter. We're going, I said. Claire blinked. Nathan, I'm not saying that to punish you. I added, softer. I'm saying it because I need to see what they're planning. And because you shouldn't have to keep absorbing their pressure alone. Her eyes searched mine. You don't understand what they're like when they decide something. I understand enough, I said. And I'm not afraid of them. That was true, not because I felt invincible, because I knew exactly how much power they'd handed to a stranger over the last 8 years without ever asking who he was. Still, I could see the guilt on Claire's face, like she felt responsible for bringing me into their orbit. I reached across the counter and took her hands. Listen to me. I married you. I didn't marry their approval. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Okay, she whispered, but it didn't sound like relief. It sounded like bracing for impact. And as I held her hands, I made a decision I hadn't put into words until that moment. I would tolerate discomfort. I would tolerate arrogance. I would even tolerate humiliation aimed at me. But if they crossed one line, if they tried to control Claire, buy her, threaten her, reduce our marriage to a transaction, I would stop playing the harmless son-in-law they'd invented. I put on the outfit that makes me look harmless, and we drove to the house that taught them to confuse wealth with worth. The Hale house always looked the same, perfect in a way that didn't feel human. Even at night, the exterior lighting turned the stone facade into something staged, like a photo in a magazine. The driveway curved past manicured shrubs and a fountain that was somehow always running. When we pulled up, I caught my reflection in the window, cactus, plain buttoned down, sleeves rolled just enough to look respectable. The uniform of a man who didn't belong in their world, but was allowed inside it as long as he stayed quiet. Claire reached for my hand before we got out of the car. Whatever happens, she said, voice low, I'm on your side. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of loyalty that mattered because it didn't need an audience. Diane opened the door herself, which was unusual. Normally someone else would. Her smile was bright, controlled, and a fraction too slow to reach her eyes. Claire, darling, she said, kissing her cheek. Then she looked at me. Nathan. She said my name correctly this time, like she'd practiced. Richard was already in the dining room, standing at the head of the table in a tailored suit, because of course he was. In his world, even family dinner was a performance. He shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who believed dominance could be transmitted through skin contact. Good to see you, he said. The table was set for 4, but the place settings looked like a diplomatic summit. Heavy cutlery, crystal, plates with gold edges that probably cost more than my first car. A woman I'd seen around the house before, staff, not family, poured water silently and vanished like she was part of the furniture. We sat. Richard took the head. Diane sat opposite Claire, angled just so. Claire and I sat side by side like a single unit they were trying to separate by pressure. The first course arrived, and for a while it was all safe talk. Claire's nonprofit, Diane's latest charity committee, Richard's Busey Quarter. Then Richard turned to me, and his tone shifted into what I'd come to recognize as his favorite role teacher. So, Nathan, he said, cutting his food slowly, Claire tells us you're in finance. I nodded. Less. He smiled politely. Well, real estate development is a different animal. People think it's just buying property and collecting rent. He gave a small laugh, like the ignorance of the masses amused him. But the capital stack, the regulatory environment, risk exposure, those are things you only understand when you've built something. Claire's hand brushed mine under the table, one squeeze, a warning, and an anchor. Dad, she said, calm but firm, Nathan understands risk exposure. It's literally his job. Richard blinked, as if surprised she'd corrected him in front of me. Of course, he said, recovering smoothly. I'm sure he understands it academically. There it was. The little twist of the blade. Diane jumped in with curated sweetness. We're just happy Claire has companionship. The Claire's fingers tightened around mine. We ate. We made small talk. We pretended this was normal. But Richard kept glancing toward a leather folder sitting on a sideboard near him, like it was waiting its turn. When the main course was cleared, he set his napkin down with slow intention and finally reached for it. Then the plates cleared, and I watched him reach for the leather folder like it was a weapon he'd used 1,000 times. Richard placed the leather folder on the table with a softness that was almost theatrical, like he wanted it to feel respectful, like this was a conversation between equals. Nathan, he began, voice shifting into that boardroom tone, measured, authoritative, final. Your marriage to Claire has complicated things. The Claire stiffened beside me. Dad, don't. He lifted a hand without looking at her. Not aggressive, just dismissive, the way you quiet a distraction. Let me finish, he said. Diane dabbed her lips with her napkin, eyes on her plate. We've tried to be supportive, she added, as if they'd been generous hosts instead of consistent critics. But Claire has given up so much. I haven't given up anything. Claire snapped. Richard ignored her again, turning fully to me. You're a decent man, he said like he was offering a compliment to a waiter. But we both know this arrangement isn't sustainable. Claire deserves a life that matches her potential. He opened the folder and slid the papers toward me first. Clean, printed, clipped neatly like a business proposal. On top was a document with a title in bold that made Claire suck in a breath. Annulment agreement. Clipped to the front, visible like bait, was a check. 500 Zosen. For a moment, the number didn't even register as money. It registered as meaning this is what they think you're worth. This is what they think your marriage costs. Diane's voice went softer, almost maternal. It's the kindest way, Nathan. No fighting, no ugliness. An annulment is cleaner. Like acknowledging this was a mistake without turning it into a scandal. A mistake. Claire's voice broke on the word. You're calling my marriage a mistake. Richard finally looked at his daughter, and the expression on his face wasn't cruelty. It was certainty. Sweetheart, sit down, he said. This isn't about emotions, it's about your future. Claire pushed back from the table just enough that her chair legs scraped. My future is my husband. The Richard turned back to me as if she hadn't spoken. Take the check, he said plainly. Sign, walk away. You'll be compensated fairly for your time, and Claire can move on without baggage. I stared at the paper. $500,000. To a man like Richard, it was an amount designed to feel generous and irresistible. To the version of me he'd invented. A spreadsheet guy. In a modest apartment. It was supposed to end the conversation. To the real me, it was almost laughable. Almost. Not because of the amount, because of the arrogance. Claire's hand found my forearm, gripping hard. Nathan, don't you dare. I'm not. I said quietly, and I meant it. But I also felt something shift inside me, something cold and perfectly still. I picked up the check and looked at it as if I'd never seen one before. Then I set it down carefully, smoothing it flat with 2 fingers. Just so I understand, I said, calm, precise. You're offering me $500,000 to end my marriage to your daughter. It's not a divorce. Diane corrected quickly. An annulment. Much cleaner. Right, I said, nodding slowly. And in exchange, Claire gets what exactly? Your approval. Richard's jaw tightened. Claire gets her life back. And you get to fix the embarrassment? I said, still calm. Claire let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. I can't believe you're doing this. Richard's eyes stayed on me. Nathan, he said, voice lowering. This is the mature way to handle it. You can fight us, or you can take the deal and leave with dignity. I held his gaze, then glanced at the folder, at the check, at the documents like they were pieces on a chessboard he didn't realize he'd already lost. Before I answer, I said, I need to make one quick call. Claire turned toward me, confused. A call. To who? To make sure everyone at this table is speaking from the same set of facts, I replied. Richard's smile twitched. You're not calling a lawyer, are you? I slid my phone out of my pocket. Something like that. He thought my call was a bluff. He didn't realize he'd spent years taking money from me and calling it his success. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just unlocked my phone, scrolled to a contact labeled FSM Pennington, and hit call. Marcus answered on the second ring, like he always did when I called after hours. Nathan, Marcus, I said evenly. I'm at dinner with the Hales. Something came up that requires clarity. Are you in a place where you can speak freely? I am, he said, already shifting into professional mode. I set the phone down on the table and turned on speaker. Richard's eyes narrowed. This is unnecessary, maybe, I said. But it'll save us time. Marcus's voice filled the room, calm and precise. How can I help? Please confirm, I said. The current share position NC Holdings has in Hale Development Group. There was a half-second pause, paper shuffling on the other end, a keyboard click. Marcus never asked questions he didn't need to ask. NC Holdings holds approximately 47% of the outstanding shares, he said. It is the single largest shareholder of Hale Development Group. The words landed like a dropped plate. Richard's posture shifted slightly, like his body tried to reject what his mind hadn't processed yet. That's, he started, then stopped. That's an institutional fund. Marcus continued unfazed. Richard Hale personally holds around 18%. The remainder is distributed among various private investors and institutions. Diane's hand went to her chest. 47, she whispered, like the number itself was offensive. Claire stared at the phone, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Nathan, she breathed. It wasn't a question yet. It was her brain trying to catch up. Richard leaned forward, his chair creaking. Who is this? He demanded, voice sharp. Why are we talking about my company at my dinner table? Because you brought contracts to your dinner table, I said, still quiet. So now we're just being honest about what kind of meeting this is. I looked down at my phone. Marcus, for the sake of transparency, please confirm who owns the controlling interest of NC Holdings. The room went so still I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. Marcus didn't hesitate. NC Holdings is wholly owned by Nathan Cross. Claire's breath caught. Diane went pale so fast I thought she might faint. Richard's face tightened like someone had pulled a wire under his skin. No, he said, almost gently, like he was correcting a child. That's impossible. Nathan is. His eyes flicked to me, and for the first time that night I saw something crack behind them. Nathan is a data analyst. I am, I said. That part wasn't a lie. Marcus continued as if reading from a report. As of the most recent close, the value of NC Holdings' stake in Hale Development Group is approximately $10.8 billion, based on market capitalization. $10.8 billion. The number didn't echo. It didn't need to. It just sat in the air, heavy and final. Claire turned toward me slowly, like she was afraid any sudden movement might make this vanish. You own. Her voice broke. Nathan, what is this? I held her gaze. I'll explain. I said softly, and I meant it. Then I looked back at Richard. Richard's hands gripped the edge of the table. You're telling me, he said through clenched teeth, that my daughter's husband owns the largest stake in your company. I finished for him. Yes. Diane's mascara was starting to smudge. Why would you hide this? She said, voice thin with panic. Why would you live like this? I didn't answer her. Not yet. Because the real question was sitting in front of me, sweating in a suit. Richard swallowed hard. If that's true, he said, and I could hear the fear trying to disguise itself as anger. What do you want? I glanced at the check still lying on the table. $500,000. The number suddenly looked small, not just compared to billions, compared to the audacity. What I want, I said. As for you to answer one question honestly. Richard's eyes locked on mine. Would any of this have been acceptable? I asked. If I was exactly who you thought I was, if I really was just a man with a normal job and a modest life. Would trying to buy me out of my marriage suddenly be moral? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Claire's voice came out sharper now, trembling with anger. You were going to pay him to leave me. Diane reached for her. Claire! Don't touch me. Claire snapped, pulling her hand back. I picked up my phone again. Marcus, I said. I want an emergency board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. I want it on record that the largest shareholder is requesting it. Richard's head snapped up. No. Marcus's voice stayed even. Understood. I'll notify counsel and the board secretary tonight. Richard stood so abruptly his chair scraped hard against the floor. "You can't do this," he said, breathing faster now. "The board will never. The board will do what the voting power dictates," Marcus said calmly. I looked at Richard, and my voice didn't change, which somehow made it worse. "You wanted to handle things like adults," I said. "Fine. Adults deal with consequences." The check was still on the table, but now it looked like a joke nobody wanted to laugh at. Richard stayed standing, hands planted on the table like he could physically hold reality in place. Diane's lips trembled. Claire looked between them and me, as if she was seeing 3 different versions of her life at once. The one she grew up in, the one she built with me, and the one she'd never been allowed to imagine. I kept my voice measured. Not because I was trying to be kind to Richard. Because if I raised it, he'd focus on my tone instead of his actions. "Let's be clear," I said. "I didn't invest in Hale Development to steal it from you. I invested because 8 years ago your company was undervalued and your projects had potential. You needed capital. I provided it." Quietly, Richard's jaw flexed. "You were manipulating me?" "No," I said. "I was buying stock, the same way anyone buys stock. You just never bothered to ask who was keeping you afloat because the money was convenient." Diane's voice came out small. "But why hide it from us?" "From Claire." I looked at Claire first before I answered, because she was the only person in that room who mattered. "I hid it because I didn't want our relationship to be a negotiation," I said. "I didn't want your family treating my worth like something that rises and falls with my net worth. I wanted to be Claire's husband, not Richard Hale's investment opportunity." Claire's eyes filled, but her expression wasn't soft. It was wounded. "You let them treat you like that," she said, voice shaking. "You let them humiliate you for years." "I did," I admitted. "And if it had only been about me, I would have kept swallowing it." I turned back to Richard. "But tonight wasn't about me," I continued. "Tonight you tried to buy your daughter's marriage, like she was a line item you could eliminate. You told her to sit down while you talked about her life. You treated my marriage like a mistake you could erase with a check." Richard's face reddened. "I was protecting her." "No." Claire cut in, sharp and raw. "You were controlling me." The room went silent again, different this time. Not shock, a truth finally said aloud. I nodded once. "Here's what's gonna happen," I said. "On Monday there will be a board meeting. The company deserves leadership that doesn't confuse ego with competence. Whether you stay involved at all depends on what you do next." Richard stared at me, breathing through his nose. "If you cooperate," I said, "you can step down with dignity. Advisory role, defined responsibilities, no more day-to-day control. If you fight it, I'll still win the vote. But it'll be messy, public, and humiliating. That's your choice." Diane looked like she might speak, then thought better of it. Claire stood up fully now, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. She didn't look at her parents. She looked at me. "And what about you?" she asked, voice breaking on the last word. "What about the fact that you kept this from me?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. There wasn't a clever answer. There was only the truth. "I was afraid," I said quietly. "Afraid money would poison what we have." Her eyes held mine for a long moment, and I could see the anger fighting with love. "Let's go," she said finally. We left without dessert, without goodbyes, without the performance. And as we walked out into the cold night air, I realized something that hit harder than Richard's panic. Taking her father's power was easy. Earning back my wife's trust was the part that scared me. The car door shut with a dull thud that sounded final. For a few blocks, neither of us spoke. Chicago lights slid across the windshield in soft streaks. The heater clicked on. The old engine hummed the way it always did, steady, unbothered. My hands stayed at 10 and 2, like I could drive us out of what had just happened if I kept the wheels straight enough. Claire stared out the passenger window, jaw set, eyes glassy but dry now. Anger had replaced shock, and anger was easier to hold than heartbreak. "How long?" she asked finally. 2 words, no decoration. The question every viewer would ask, the one I'd been dreading since the moment I put Marcus on speaker. I swallowed. 8 years, I said. "Since before I met you." The Claire's head turned slowly. "Before you met me," she repeated, like she needed to hear it twice to decide whether it made it better or worse. "Yes," I said. I started buying into your dad's company when I was 24. It was a good investment. Your father was over-leveraged, the assets were solid, and the market was wrong about his long-term potential. And you never thought to tell me. Her voice lifted on the last word. Not yelling, but close. I thought about it constantly. I admitted the silence that followed was thick. Then she spoke again, quieter, more dangerous. Why, Nathan? I kept my eyes on the road. Not because I couldn't look at her. Because if I did, I might break. Because I didn't want you to doubt me, I said. I didn't want you to wonder if I married you because of your last name, or because I wanted access to your family's world. Claire let out a short, bitter laugh. Access. Nathan, you own the building they're standing in. I know, I said. But you didn't. And that mattered. She rubbed her forehead with her fingers. So you let me stress about money sometimes. You let me feel guilty that we weren't living the way my parents expected. You let me defend you when they looked down on you. When you could have ended it in one sentence. I did, I said, and I didn't try to soften it. And I'm sorry. Claire's voice cracked. I chose you when I thought you were normal, when I thought you were just a guy who loved me and wanted a simple life. I am that guy, I said quickly. That part is real. The money doesn't change that. She turned her face away again. It changes what people think, she said. Yes, I replied. And I didn't want it changing what you think. For a long time, she didn't respond. The city noise outside the windows felt distant, like we were driving through a tunnel. Finally, she spoke softer now. I need one thing from you, she said. Anything? No more secrets, she said. Not big ones. Not for my protection ones. Not ones you convince yourself are noble. I nodded, throat tight. No more secrets. She exhaled, a shaky release. Okay, she whispered, like she was making herself step back from the edge. Ahead, the traffic light turned red, and I stopped. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. Marcus, no doubt, already moving pieces into place for Monday. Claire glanced down at my pocket like she could feel it too. What happens Monday? She asked. I kept my voice steady. Monday, your father learns what consequences look like when the person you underestimate is the one holding the votes. By the time Monday came, the dinner was already spreading through their world like smoke. By the time we got home, my phone had turned into a pulse. Voicemails, missed calls, texts that shifted tone every few minutes like Diane and Richard were trading the phone back and forth. Hey Richard, we need to talk. This is not the place to handle business. Just Diana Claire, please call me. Please. Richard, if you do this, you'll regret it. Diane, we didn't mean it the way it sounded. We were trying to help you. Richard, you're embarrassing the family. Claire watched the screen light up on the kitchen counter like it was a live insect. Don't answer, I said. She didn't. She picked up her phone, opened her contact list, and did something that surprised me. She created a new thread. Clarice, I'm safe. I'm with my husband. Do not come to our home. Do not contact Nathan. If you want to speak to me, email me and I will respond when I'm ready. Then she muted the conversation. It wasn't dramatic. It was a boundary. The kind of boundary her parents had never respected because they'd never had to. By Sunday night, the story had started leaking into their orbit. Not the whole truth, just whispers. People in that world live off optics. A tense dinner becomes a rumor. A rumor becomes a narrative. By the time anything reaches daylight, it's already been shaped. Monday morning, the real story moved into the only place Richard ever truly respected, a conference room. I didn't attend in person. That wasn't theater I needed. Marcus did, along with outside counsel and the board secretary. The meeting was scheduled properly, documented properly, and conducted like what it was: corporate governance. The board didn't care that Richard was my father-in-law. They cared that investor confidence had been shaken, leadership risk had increased, and the largest shareholder was formally raising concerns. At 9:00 a.m. Marcus called me. We're in session, he said. I put him on speaker again, this time at my own kitchen table, Claire sitting across from me with cold coffee untouched. Richard is here. Marcus continued. He's not taking it well. I heard it then in the background. Richard's voice, muffled but sharp. This is a hostile takeover. Sir. Another voice cut in, calm and firm. This is a governance meeting. Please stay on agenda. Marcus's tone remained neutral. We presented the motion. We reviewed performance concerns and leadership conduct risk. We took the vote. My pulse stayed steady. Claire's fingers curled around her mug. What's the outcome? I asked. 78% in favor of removing Richard Hale as CEO, Marcus said. He will be offered a non-executive advisory position subject to board approval, with no operational authority. Claire closed her eyes. Relief flickered across her face first, then grief followed right behind it, heavy and complicated. That's my dad, she whispered. I know, I said quietly. A minute later, Diane called again. Claire didn't answer. She stared at her phone until it stopped ringing. Then, late that afternoon, a letter arrived by courier. Real paper. Heavy stock. The kind of letter people send when they want something to feel serious. Claire opened it at the counter. I watched her read, her expression tightening, then loosening, then tightening again. It's from my mom, she said, voice flat. She handed it to me. It wasn't long. Claire, I don't know how to fix what we broke, but I need to see you. We need to speak as a family. Not in an office, not through lawyers, not through threats. Please. Dinner, your home, your rules. I'll come without expectations. Just let me try. Claire stared at the page as if it might change if she blinked. She wasn't ready to forgive. But for the first time since I'd known her, her parents were asking instead of demanding. The second dinner wasn't in a mansion. It was in the smallest room they'd ever had to be honest in. Friday came faster than either of us wanted. Claire cooked herself. Pasta, salad, bread from the corner bakery. Nothing fancy. No staff, no crystal, no performance. When the knock came, she didn't move right away. She stood in the kitchen with her hands on the counter, breathing like she was about to walk into a storm. I came up behind her. We can cancel, I said softly. She shook her head once. No, she whispered. I need to hear what they have to say when they can't hide behind all that. I opened the door. Richard and Diane stood there looking strangely ordinary. Richard was in jeans and a dark sweater, his hair slightly unkempt like he'd run his hands through it too many times. Diane wore simple slacks and minimal makeup. No pearls, no heels, no armor. Their eyes flicked past me into our small living room, our secondhand bookshelf, the framed photos from trips we took on Claire's nonprofit salary and my data analyst income, the worn sofa we never replaced because it worked just fine. For a second, I saw what they saw, the life they'd been judging, and I saw something else too, how unfamiliar it was for them to step into a room where money couldn't speak for them. Thank you for letting us come, Diane said, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. Claire didn't hug her. She didn't smile. She just nodded toward the table. Sit. We ate for a few minutes in careful silence, forks against plates, a glass of water being set down a little too hard. Richard clearing his throat like he was searching for the version of himself that knew how to speak without commanding. Finally, he looked at Claire. Sweetheart. He began, then stopped. The word sounded wrong in his mouth, like it wasn't part of his usual vocabulary. I owe you an apology, he said, and this time he didn't glance at me for permission. Not a vague one. A real one. Claire's eyes stayed steady. For what? She asked. Be specific. Richard swallowed. For treating your marriage like a problem I could solve. For talking over you. For acting like your choices needed my approval. For offering that check. His jaw tightened with shame. And telling you to sit down while I did it. Diane's eyes filled. We tried to control you, she whispered to Claire. We told ourselves it was protection. But it was control. And it was wrong. The Claire's voice didn't soften. You didn't just disrespect my husband, she said. You disrespected me. You made me feel like my love was embarrassing. Richard's eyes glistened. I know, he said quietly. And I hate that I did that to you. I let the moment sit, because Claire deserved to own it without me stepping in. Then I spoke. Not to punish them, but to set the world straight. If we're doing this, I said, calm, then it comes with boundaries. Richard nodded quickly, too quickly. Name them. No more tests, I said. No more comments about status. No more comparing Claire's life to someone else's version of success. And you will never again speak to your daughter like she's not an adult. Diane wiped her cheek. Agreed. Claire finally exhaled, a long breath that sounded like years leaving her chest. I'm not promising forgiveness tonight, she said. But I'm willing to try. On my terms. Richard nodded. Your terms. After dinner, when they left, the apartment felt quiet in a different way. Not empty, lighter. Claire leaned against the counter, eyes tired. "Do you think they mean it?" she asked. "I think they're scared," I said. "But fear can be the first honest thing some people ever feel." She looked at me then, not angry, not accusing, just thoughtful. "What do we do with all of it?" she asked. "The money, the power, the options." It turned out the real question wasn't what I could buy. It was what kind of life we refused to sell. 3 months later, Hale Development Group looked like a different company, not because I changed the logo or made headlines, but because the day-to-day stopped revolving around one man's ego. A professional executive team was installed. Projects were audited. Spending was tightened. The board meetings got quieter and more productive. The market rewarded competence the way it usually does when you let it. Richard kept his advisory seat, not as a trophy, not as mercy, as a boundary. He still had experience, and if he wanted to earn his way back into his daughter's trust, it had to be through humility, not authority. Claire's world changed faster. We set up a foundation with one rule: the money had to create something real. No vanity donations, no gala photos, no plaques on walls. Claire expanded her nonprofit programs into 3 additional school districts. We funded after-school tutoring, mental health support, and scholarships for students who didn't have the right last name but had the right drive. And the strangest part, we kept our apartment. We didn't move into a mansion. We didn't trade my old car for something that announced itself at traffic lights. We made one upgrade: better locks and a security system, because privacy matters when people learn numbers they don't understand. But our life stayed ours: quiet dinners, walks by the lake, work that meant something, and a marriage that finally had no hidden rooms. Claire and I still talk about that night sometimes. The check, the folder, the moment her father tried to negotiate her happiness like it was a deal. "What would have happened," she asked me once, "if you really were who they thought you were?" I didn't even need to think. "They would have crushed us," I said, and called it protection. That's the lesson I took from it. Being underestimated hurts. It can make you doubt yourself, shrink yourself, start apologizing for taking up space. But it can also be an advantage, because while people are busy labeling you, they stop paying attention to what you're becoming. And love, real love, isn't proven by what you can provide. It's proven by what you refuse to sell. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated or judged by someone with power? Someone who thought their money, their status, or their connections made them better than you? What did you do about it? Drop your story in the comments. I read them. And if you want more stories about justice, boundaries, and the quiet satisfaction of proving people wrong, subscribe and stick around. Because the most dangerous person at any table is the one everyone ignores. While they're busy counting you out, you might be busy becoming the reason their world changes.